Hi, Zaina.
Hi, lovely to be here.
Me too. How fun to virtually be talking to you. I wish it was in real life, but
Yeah.
such is life these days. Well, congratulations on You Exist Too Much. I know this is my advanced copy, but this awesome cover for everybody watching.
Thank you.
Your debut novel, June 9th, it just came out. How does it feel to have a book out in the world, especially now?
It's exhilarating, to be honest. Of course, I couldn't have predicted the circumstances, the global circumstances that the world that the book would be arriving into. But, as a Palestinian, I feel as though, resistance is such a part of my experience and my background that it just sort of felt kind of right to be putting a book that's has Palestinian characters in it out into the world at this time. So that's been nice. But yeah, it's been exhilarating and exciting and everything really.
And we were chatting before this started about that. Maybe there are some perks to doing a whole virtual book tour. You get to save a lot of exhaustion from traveling all over the world, despite the disappointment of not being able to be in those places.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, and it's great to have this virtual platform because you can connect with people and readers and writers that are everywhere in the world. So that's really the plus side, I think. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
let's back up to your book a little bit. I know you're going to read a little bit to introduce everybody to your beautiful, beautiful writing. And as you know, I've picked this as like some of my top books in the Good Morning America article and all the rest. And I think your book is fantastic, and that everybody should click this little button that says purchase it that they're looking at. So
Thank you.
read and give them a little preview.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much for all of that support. It's meant a lot to me. And I'm gonna read. So yeah, I'm gonna read from. It's cool because it shines when you with these little amazing things, these stripes. I'm gonna read from the very opening of the book, just a few pages. So no setup needed because these are the opening pages. In Bethlehem, when I was 12, men in airy white gowns sat at a three-legged table outside the Church of the Nativity. They ran prayer beads through their fingers and sipped mint tea in gold-rimmed cups shaped like hourglasses, steam floating off the surface and up into the bright blue sky. I walked past them with my mother and my uncle as we wandered through the holy city. One of the men called out, "Haram," forbidden. For the especially devout among us, it's haram to eat meat unless the animal has been killed in a specific way. Haram to drink alcohol. Haram for a pubescent girl to expose her legs in a biblical city. It occurred to me then that I wasn't a flat-chested kid anymore, that curves had begun to appear along the length of me. I was no longer indistinguishable from a boy child. What should we do? I asked my mother. I felt a pulsing lump take shape in my throat as I noticed her jaw extended and temples shimmering. My great-grandparents' house was where we were staying and where all of my clothes were, 36 miles and 3 checkpoints away. I should have had more sense than to dress in such a way when we were visiting the birthplace of a prophet, albeit not our own. My mother had, and still has, a native's knowledge. She knows the rules instinctively in that part of the world, and I only ever learned them by accident. "Basita," said my uncle. "It's okay." We approached the main door of the church, and the men hissed again. My uncle ran the tips of his fingers across his mustache, then looked to my mother and me. "Come," he said, "I have an idea." We followed him into a gift shop just off Manger Square. He dropped a few coins on the counter, then asked the shopkeeper if we could use his bathroom. My mother grabbed a Kit Kat off the shelf and tore it open, breaking apart 2 sticks without a second thought. My uncle dropped 3 more coins on the counter. The man pointed toward the back. My uncle thanked him and led the way. His master plan was that he would trade me his trousers for my Roxy surfer shorts. He went into the bathroom first, and I could hear sounds of fumbling, his belt jangling as it hit the floor. He opened the door slightly and handed his pants to my mother so she could administer the swap. She then stood in front of me while I took off my shorts. "Yalla," she said, her most frequently used word. "Hurry." I pulled on the pair of pants. They sagged on me. I had to tighten the belt buckle all the way up to the last hole and then roll the waist so that they wouldn't fall off, leaving me even more exposed than I had been before. I stepped out of the bathroom and looked at my uncle. I examined my new curves against his pasty legs, gangly and covered in sporadic patches of hair, my shorts tight against his thighs. It occurred to me in that moment to question why, as a man, his bare legs were somehow less troubling than mine. It was a double standard, a shame I had simply accepted until then. In acquiring my gender, I had become offensive. But as I stood in front of him, an unexpected pride began to swell inside me. I liked the way his trousers made me feel. Like I could get attention from boys, from girls. I felt, for once, seen. Inti walad wala binat? Are you a boy or a girl? A security guard at the Intercontinental Hotel in Amman, Jordan, had once asked my cousin Noor this question when deciding whether to lead her into the curtain-shrouded women's check for an intimate pat-down before she could enter the lobby. Binat, Noor had responded. Girl. She'd been insulted by the question, the uncertainty it revealed. But not me. Not that day. Wearing my uncle's baggy trousers, I enjoyed occupying blurred lines. Ambiguity was an unsettling yet exhilarating space. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Beautiful. So I have to say, when I first started reading this, I kept flipping to the cover and I was like, wait, is this a memoir or is this a novel? Is this actually what happened to her or not? Not that you have to go into every detail, but in general, how did you come up with the idea for this book, and was it in some way autobiographical?
So the elements of the book that are in fact autobiographical are the protagonist's identity markers. She's Palestinian American. I am too. She is queer. She's bisexual. I am too. And one of the first, I guess, reasons for wanting to create this book was to see those identities reflected on the page, because I hadn't encountered a lot of literature with, bicultural, bisexual characters. And, the other sort of, all of the stories within the book are, fictional, but those identity markers derive from my own life. And so, yeah, did you also ask where the idea came from? Or did I just imagine that?
I think I asked it. I don't know. I jumbled a bunch of questions into one. Yeah. So, Zaina, where did you come up with the idea for this book?
So the book really began with a question pertaining to unattainability and why it is that things that are off in the distance could be more appealing than something that you had right in front of you. And I tried to imagine what kind of person would set their sights on something unattainable and why they might do that. And I initially kind of located that question in love, and the character setting her sights on people, primarily women, that are unattainable for various reasons. And in sort of circling around that question and drawing those storylines, I tapped into a sort of larger unattainability, both in the context of her relationship with her mother and her mother as a force in her life, who is very unattainable insofar as she's withholding and also kind of from a different world because she's an immigrant and the daughter is first generation. And then also a larger, more political, cultural element of Palestinianness and being part of a community where your existence hasn't been validated because Palestinians don't have statehood, they don't have the right to self-determination. So there were these multiple levels of unattainability, and it was basically the process of writing was very circular, where I just began in one circle and then moved to another circle, and found connections between them. So yeah.
I found one of the first interactions between the mom and the main character, who goes unnamed, but the main character. So I'm not going to say you, but if I do,
sure.
smack me around. The main character and her mother, she was afraid, given the mother's sort of lack of acceptance of her lifestyle, what she imagined would be a lack of acceptance. She hadn't told her mother that she had a serious girlfriend with whom she was living and that she was in love and wanted to spend her life with someone and all the rest. And of course, the girlfriend was not happy about that, especially after she's pretending that, her boyfriend is off on a business trip all the time. Anyway, then the mother comes and they have a meal at a restaurant. And so the main character gently asks, like, well, if I were to marry a woman, how would you feel? And the mother's like, I would be very upset. And it becomes a whole big explosive thing where the mother runs out and the two women are left sitting there and it's like a whole thing. So just tell me a little more about that moment, because I feel like it's probably something that a lot of people have gone through in any similar, for this reason, for other reasons, when they're afraid that their partner won't be accepted by their parents in some way, which is a very common occurrence.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think that there are many ways to sort of look at the trajectory of the book, but for me, this entire book is about this character coming out to her mother. And at that moment of going to dinner with the girlfriend and the mother and like deceiving the mother into thinking that the girlfriend is just a friend is something that in the context of the book sort of I wanted to show what the stakes were, to show the resistance that this character was facing when it came to gaining acceptance from her mother. And, on a personal level, of course, there is, especially given my cultural and religious background, I mean, like gaining that acceptance is and remains a journey. And there are many ways that parents react to it, at least in the experience of friends and, members of my community. And I wrote it in such a way that would allow for this journey to sort of persist, where, the mother remains in the narrator's life. The narrator is really close to her and wants her approval and wants her love. And how does she go about being true to herself and, being honest and authentic and gaining that approval and love, and are these things compatible? So that was a question that drives that narrative. Yeah.
And you also had this theme of eating disorders that ran through the narrative as well. And that's actually where the protagonist and her girlfriend at the opening had met, and it keeps coming up over and over again. Tell me about the decision to make that one of the central parts of the book as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, by the way, I close my eyes sometimes when I talk. Don't be alarmed. So, the eating disorder component speaks to appetite, essentially, because this book, in many ways, the character struggles with or feels the need to suppress appetite, both in her romantic longings as well as, in a literal sense of starving herself. And so that's why that history of anorexia exists in the book and in this character's backstory, along with the fact that so much of her impulse is to sort of erase herself and to self-negate because of the shame and internalized homophobia that she is living with. And so, she has, you mentioned that the narrator has no name, that's an intentional decision to have her sort of exist less on the page. And there are some relationships in which she doesn't even have any dialogue, where we never hear her speak. And so an eating disorder like anorexia is also a way to kind of try and, exist less, to negate oneself. So that's why the eating disorder is part of her backstory and her experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like it also dovetails with this whole notion of deception, which you've already touched on, deceiving the mother, the whole secrecy behind having an eating disorder, and that you have to usually keep it very, you're hiding what's going on, sometimes in plain sight, but you're trying to hide the mental anguish you're going through by an external manifestation of it. And you had one quote in the book that said, secrets keep us sick," which I felt like it was presented within the context of like a group therapy type of situation. But I feel like that's something that sort of pervaded the whole story. So talk to me about your relationship to secrets and why you put it in the book and how you sort of feel they affect our lives as well.
Well, so I think that for me, I'll just say, like, for me as a queer woman growing up in a rather unaccepting culture and family, I suppose, there is a lot of my experience has been hiding, and my own personal journey has been from coming from a place of hiding to coming to a place of like existing louder and authentically, really. It's been a journey that's the end goal is authenticity. And I think that for this character, so much of her behavioral patterns, which are really destructive and painful to watch, are motivated by this urge or this feeling she has that she has to, hide who she is, because of the fact that so much shame has been projected onto her. Some people would reject that. In her case, she internalizes it. And so, her behavior is motivated primarily by hiding, by locating love in these unattainable women. I mean, she's sort of pouring herself into them without she's not really even involved in those relationships because they're asymmetrical. So her journey, and I guess she has a sort of epiphany when she hears that quote of like, secrets keep us sick, is that like the way out of these destructive patterns is to be honest with not only the people around her, but with herself. She can't even face herself. And that's a huge part of her pain and struggle. So, yeah.
Did you go through a situation similar to this and that you had to tell your family, or that you kept it secret, or like what happened? Tell me about the most emotional parts of your life, telling about your sexuality to your family. Go ahead. Just
to be honest, without, of course it's been a journey, and it's my own journey of coming out followed a different trajectory than this character's journey, and even so with her family as well. I think that what I can really relate to is that internalizing of, there's, homophobia around us everywhere. And what is interesting to me, I suppose, and what I relate to is the way that that homophobia can be internalized, and it can lead to such sort of negative, painful repercussions for a person. So, I understand that experience. But like the way that it manifests in her life is different than the way that it's manifested in mine. And the way that her family responds is different than the way that my family responded. However, it's not been easy for either of us, I think.
Sorry to hear that. And I'm also sorry to pry, but
No, I think it's okay. Of course, like I would never write a character who was, why would it's a lot of, anyway, it makes sense that I would share some of her experiences.
How did you feel once you got all of this down on the page? Like, is this a topic that you had tried to write a lot about? I know you've been a journalist for a while and you have an MFA and all the rest. Is this something you like kept going back to try to crack, or something like, how did it feel to get this version of it on the page?
Well, I think fiction was a perfect vehicle for this kind of story for a number of reasons. I mean, one, I wanted to really challenge I wanted to be subversive when it came to creating characters that were Arab and specifically Palestinian and Muslim, and to challenge stereotypical depictions of Arabs and Muslims. And similarly I wanted to challenge stereotypical depictions of queer people as well, and to really just three-dimensionalize, which I felt I had more room to do in fiction. And getting the story on there was so much. It was very hard to get to write the story and to communicate the precise nature of her struggle, because of the fact that so much of it was coming from within. And in many ways, she was up against herself more than anyone else. And so trying to really capture the psychological dynamics. And I just remember the moments of epiphany where when I would realize, like, yes, this is exactly where her shame lies, or this is exactly why her shame exists as it does. This is exactly why she's destroying this potential for a healthy relationship. Like, understanding that was at once revelatory and really, a breakthrough, and also like really hard to depict in writing. Or hard to depict in a way that was artful. And so yes, it was exhilarating and difficult.
And how long did the whole book take to write, and where did you write it? Like, did you outline? I know you had talked about these concentric circles essentially, but did you outline any of it? At what point did you see the whole thing coming together?
So the book took 6 years to write, and I wrote a lot of it while I was in Iowa in my MFA program. And the way that the process of writing it, because the book involves so many flashbacks and memories that are placed within the present text, the present day scenes, as a way to suggest how one's present reality is impacted by one's past and, collective cultural trauma as well as personal trauma. Because the book has that structure, it was really hard to kind of put that all together. And I spent a lot of time, like I was actually just looking through my photo album on my phone, and I found all these pictures of pages that I taped all the pages of the book to the wall and would move them around and figure out like what should go where and what memories spoke to which scenes, and how to like transition into them without being heavy-handed. So that was a huge part of the process, was figuring out the structure of the book, for sure. And the circles, each circle had a sort of question attached, and I would often find the question and then just write it on a note card and tape it above my desk and hope that it would like trickle into the story, and like just like close my eyes and allow it to infuse my brain and like just marinate in my head. So, it's weird. All these weird tactics that it wasn't like a straight through process. Although there were big chunks that I wrote like in sort of like 1 or 2 months at a time. But yeah, a lot of this, it took a while to write this book because there were just so many parts, I think, that I wanted to fit together.
And what about the journey to getting it published?
Yeah, so that journey was also interesting. What was the journey? That was a journey, as like it was. So one of the things that is, I think, I was thinking about this yesterday, is that there is an expectation when you're writing a book and the character is, let's say, Arab, or the character is Muslim, or the character is queer. And if readers, let's say editors or agents, they don't feel that expectation is being met, they're uncomfortable with that, or they want more. Like, for example, I would hear a lot of feedback from, agents or saying things like they wanted more spices from the marketplace, things that were really, just particularly I guess, emblematic of Middle East. And I was not trying to do that because like I wanted the Palestinianness of the character to be just sort of woven into her to her and to the story, and to not have it be this. And I was trying to like challenge these traditional images in anyway. So a lot and similarly with creating a queer character, there is a host of expectations and like, you know, sort of limits as to what kind of queer characters you can write. And this queer character defies a lot of those expectations and transcends a lot of those limitations. So it was, when I found the agent that read the book as like a story, just a human story with a series of like, you know, love stories and one primary love story, that was like the right agent, because she wasn't reading it in the context of like just reducing it to those identity markers and what the expectations around them were. And so that was so important to me. I felt like, yeah, she saw the book the way I wanted her to, or I would hope that a reader would. And it was the same with my editor. That was my criteria, what I hoped for. And finding that was part of the process. And in the end was that much more rewarding, because like both my agent and editor saw the story first. And that was what I really had hoped for.
Well, it just goes to show that having the right agent and editor makes all the difference, because then you end up with a book as good and authentic and honest and open and believable as yours, right? I mean, that's why I feel that's why it seemed so much like memoir. The characters were so real. It felt like you were living somebody else's experience. And, you know, it's like watching a play. Like the background, the setting is just it's just the setting. It's not about, you know, the curtains and all the rest. That's just where the drama takes place. So.
Right, precisely. And that's exactly what I wanted. And to have those elements like be a part of the story, but not like driving the story, you know? So that was, because I wanted her to be real human, because like, rather than being othered, which is what happens with members of marginalized communities when they are depicted as characters in literature, they're often, you know, othered in some way, or like, I just didn't want that to happen. So yeah,
we can buy a bunch of cookbooks with all the spices if we want to experience those markets. And,
I'm gonna staple a spice pack to the front of every book.
I love it. That's perfect. So how do you feel with like all of this hard work and these years of time and attention poured into this manuscript, that it's out in the world? Like, the night before it came out, were you worried? And I know this is a weird time, and I know we talked about this at the beginning a little, but just the feeling of having to let it go and having to, you know, sort of let it set sail on its own out there. How do you feel about that?
I mean, I keep using the word exhilarating, but it was at once terrifying and exhilarating, because, yeah, I mean, as you said, this book was like here, like for a long, long time. And then it would gradually be here, like with my agent, then editor, then like, you know, ARC goes. And so then just like really letting it go off to college, like I was nervous. I was scared. I felt emotional. I was excited to see. I was, you know, and what's happened, I suppose, since then has just exceeded my imagination in terms of what I could have, what to expect. I've never published a book before, so I didn't know what to expect. And just having people reach out and say, you know, that the book meant something to them, and specifically telling me the ways that it did, was everything I could have hoped for. I mean, like, that's the best part, you know? Yeah, I mean, I think that so much of, I think the beautiful part about books is, as a writer, is that process of writing the book, I think. And this period now when it's in the world, I guess, is also beautiful, and sort of a beautiful payoff. But at the same time, like, I feel as though my connection to the book hasn't broken. Like it's still, I was afraid, right, by like sending it off. That's what I'm trying to get at. Like that by sending it off, I would just sort of like lose something that was so close to my heart. But no, I feel like by sharing it and by connecting with readers, it's become that much more like close and in a different way. And so I just really, I don't know, I've enjoyed it, I think. Yeah. But
it's like one of those, those paddles you use as a kid where like the ball was connected by a string.
Oh,
like you would hit the ball. Like, I feel like you just hit the ball out and now it's like coming back to you because you're bringing with it like all these.
That's the perfect metaphor, right? That's exactly what it is. So yeah,
coming back. So have you been writing since this book has sort of been shipped and sealed? Have you worked on something else, or did you work in quarantine on another project, or have you been like, that's enough for now?
No, there's never enough. Never enough. You think it's gonna be enough, you're like, okay, but it's never enough for some reason. I guess I don't know. It just, yeah. So I've been working on I've been writing essays. I've been writing another novel, which is very different than this novel, and centered. Yeah, it's very different. But I've been writing a collection of essays as well that, also similarly are the characters in the essays bear a lot of the same identity markers as this protagonist, but that's still something it's not about, the essays have queerness as a sort of overarching theme, but they're about like they're human stories. And that's been my goal. And, I find that I keep returning to love for some reason. And so I do write a lot of essays that explore love in different contexts. And yeah, so it's been really fun and very different than writing a novel, of course. But I do work on that second novel a little bit every day as well, because you have to I'm afraid of losing momentum. I think that's one of my biggest fears, is losing momentum. So yeah, I always insist on going.
Good for you. Yeah, might as well. I've heard advice that just even opening the manuscript every day can help. Even if you don't work on it, you have to keep getting back in there.
Sometimes you just stare at it. I mean, honestly, and that's part of the process. And you have to be easy on yourself. And also we're going through some really challenging times and there's so much happening in the world. And like, yeah, it's hard you can't block all of that out and you don't want to. And so sometimes you're just like focusing on all of that instead. And that's okay.
I do feel sometimes the more the world feels unstable in and of itself, with everything changing from where you're allowed to go from one day to the next, and different rules and different it's just like insane. So clinging to love, like you're doing in your essays, is sort of the most fundamental place you could possibly write from right now, because that's really what binds us as humans. It makes us different from everyone. It's like that feeling of connection when we can't be with people. It's so central to everything. So you said, I don't know why I did, but it's great that you're writing about love.
No, I think it's true. And I think that in these last few months, if anything has come forward, it's love. I mean, truly, like just the way that people reconnect, the way that I watch people outside interacting with each other, the generosity, the camaraderie, the community, like so, if anything, like that's just been one of the most beautiful aspects, I think, of all that's been happening. So yeah. Why not think about love?
Why not think about love? Do you have any advice for aspiring authors?
Yes, I do. So I teach writing, actually. I've been teaching writing for 9 years, and I have lots of advice, but I'll limit it to, first of all, read, right? I mean, obviously, reading is, I guess, the best instruction for writing. I've found it to be so. And I think that really, two things. One is to exercise that muscle as often as you can, and to make it like a routine where it's like every morning, if you have even if you only have 15 minutes to try and do a few reps, right? Or if it's once a week, but just really stick to a sort of routine where it becomes a part of your life, because so much of writing and becoming an author and is writing, right? Like that's really the only training there is for it besides reading, or the best training that there is for it. And I think another thing that's really useful is to find community as a writer, and to find places that help forge a sense of community around books and literature, like the Center for Fiction, right? Or to find a writing group, or to find, a reading group, like because writing is such a alien, it can be a lonely process, of course, with many hurdles. Having support from others is just so important. Because like, I think persistence is like 60, or I don't want to put a percentage number on how much a percent it is of the process, but persisting is a huge part of like writing, and having community helps with persisting. So, yeah.
Very true.
Yeah.
And I knew you taught writing. I didn't even know that the New York Times had like a writing school or whatever until I saw that you taught there. I was like, how great is that?
Yeah, I do indeed. Yeah, I know. A lot of people don't know that they have a school because it's, I think, a relatively new thing, but it's fun.
Excellent. Well, I know we wanted to leave some time for questions. So should we open it up to questions? What do you think?
Sure, fine. I would love to have some questions from the audience.
So if anybody listening, we have one question already. It says, what were some of the formative books you read that sparked your desire to write, and what stories were missing from your early reading? And then other people listening, if you want to add some comments, ask little questions, we can read them next.
I mean, I'll start with what stories were missing. And those stories were stories by people like Carmen Mikado and T. Kara Madden and Garth Greenwell and Ocean Vuong, stories, and Meredith Talasan, who has a memoir out right now. Like writing where we see queer lives depicted on the page, where we can encounter queer characters, and queer characters of color. Those stories were, I would say, they were missing they were missing. So, which is, I suppose, a lot of why I wanted to write one. And the stories that were formative, or the book, I mean, that's funny. That question is always tough because there were so many, but at the risk of sounding somewhat pretentious, like I would say that Proust and Flaubert were my biggest influences, because that was my training. When you're studying literature, you read these sort of classics, and I really took to the structure and style of like Proust's writing and the sort of narration techniques of Flaubert. And there were so many other books that were really like I across genres, like Maggie Nelson is a writer who her work has been so influential and important to me. Ben Lerner, I really like his novels. I find them just they're so everyday in some way and observational, and I really like that register that he writes at. Jeanette Winterson was a really influential writer as well, and I think she has just such a range of different abilities when it comes to writing and subject matter, and I just really like her work as well. Those are just a few. I mean, there are so many more. I wish I could look at my bookshelf now, but it's not in front. I've been in between apartments for a long time, so my books have been not in the shelf.
I've been apart from my books now for like 3 months, and it's very, more than 3 months. It's very sad. It feels like a part of me is missing. It's what I miss the most about my apartment. But anyway.
Totally agree. It's so important to have your books around you. They're a part of you. Yeah.
Totally.
I know. Yeah.
Okay, another question from the crowd. You talked about agents looking for specific qualities in your characters, but what were some of your workshop experiences if you workshop stories with the same identity markers?
Well, what was so fantastic about my workshop experience was that, or what I suppose just interesting. I had a fantastic workshop experience. I mean, I felt like being in an MFA at Iowa really just elevated my writing, and I thought that was really lucky and fortunate. But my peers rarely, if ever, commented or addressed the identity aspects of the character. They were so focused on the sort of like craft element of the story, and the way that like structure and all those other, and even like the plot as well, but less, they were less concerned with the character's identity, which I think was really great, because I wanted that to be, I wanted to construct a story, first of all, and for the identity aspects of this character to be like really seamlessly woven into it. And I feel like had they really focused a lot on that, it might have felt like disparate from the story somehow, or like, I don't know, just clunkier rather than seamless. And so, yeah, it's interesting. No one's ever asked me that, and I'm thinking about it now, and I'm realizing that we didn't focus on that in workshop at all. So yeah, not until later when I took the book out into the world did that become a topic of conversation.
Somebody else would like to know. Oh wait, that disappeared. Oh, here it is. What have you been reading during quarantine? And also, do you know if there are any signed copies available to purchase from independent bookstores?
I'm sure that there aren't any signed copies, because I haven't signed any yet, but I would like to, and then I'll figure out how that works during a quarantine. But what have I been reading during this quarantine, is I read Kathy Park Hong's book, Minor Feelings. And I found it was so good. I loved it. I read Eulabis on Immunity, but that's an older book, and it was just relevant to what we're going through. I read Meredith Talazan has a memoir called Fairest, and I just finished reading that, and I thought it was just really beautiful. So those are some books that I have been. I read Samantha Irby. Wow, No Thank You. That was really, really good. Yeah.
I just had Meredith Talazan on my Instagram live show before I ended it. I did a little Instagram live thing during the quarantine. Anyway, she was amazing. It was such a great conversation.
I like her a lot.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Any nonfiction books or authors that really resonate with you?
Eulabis, Maggie Nelson, Edward Said, Kathy Park Hong, tons of nonfiction books that really resonate. I love nonfiction. Actually, Zadie Smith's essays, I love her essays. She's one of my favorite essayists. Who else? So many, like, let's see, I'm thinking of more, she is very contemporary. Actually, she wrote a collection of essays during quarantine that's coming out in July. I just read that, found it amazing. So yeah, those are some examples of nonfiction books that really resonate.
Well, here's a very interesting question. What are your tips to get over love addiction?
That's a good question. I don't know. Let's see. What are tips to get over love addiction? I do think I know the answer, having written a book about love addiction, I guess, is one of the best ways to get over love addiction is to find healthy love. Is to self-love. Self-love is an absence of self-love is one of the main drivers of any form of addiction, really, is something I learned. And, addiction is a form of codependency, and it can be a way of a maladaptive way of coping with a lot of like childhood trauma or past trauma. And I think in the case of love addiction, finding self-love is a useful antidote to love addiction, and really addressing a lot of those childhood wounds, which is why so many of this character's childhood memories are woven into the story, to sort of show how those create the conditions for her present self and her addictive behaviors and patterns.
I feel like reparenting is like all the rage right now. Like, it solves every problem and everyone needs to do it.
I love that. I hadn't even heard that term, reparenting, but yeah.
I feel like it's been bantied about right and left, and like, I don't know, maybe I'm interviewing too many. I feel like drawn to people who write about issues with their parents for some reason.
Oh yeah.
Let's not interpret that in any way, but okay. In what ways do you think your book resonates with or speaks to this particular historic moment?
So, in a number of ways. First, I think that by writing a character that is queer and that is also Palestinian American and Muslim American. I think that is sort of asserting that existence. And so much of the struggles of Arab Americans and queer people is like asserting an existence and saying like we exist, right? And like we're entitled to the same rights and treatment as anybody else. So I think that's one way that this book speaks to this moment in the context of like, you know, the protests and around police brutality and racial injustice. I mean, as the character being Palestinian, a member of a Palestinian diaspora, and having, you know, a lot of that cultural legacy and cultural trauma within her, that resistance aspect of her own life and like kind of denial of a right to a certain form of existence, to me, you know, speaks to the moment, because like I myself as a Palestinian, like resistance is a way of life, and I found that I've derived so much inspiration from what's happening now, and you know, I think about it in the context of that part, the Palestinian struggle. And so in a way, like I do feel that the book is arriving at a time that is just right for the book, because I mean, just resistance is a part of this book, whether it be like asserting an existence that's been deemed unacceptable or resisting certain forces outside of herself, so that have been kind of toxic. So yeah.
Someone sent in a suggestion that you could send signed book plates to any independent bookstore.
Yeah, people keep talking about these book plates. I have to give me a whole lecture about that, because I want to do that, and I'm going to.
Book plates are us.